Fog hung heavy over Buckingham Palace that morning, adding this layer of grandeur and mystery, just like any other day. Tourists clustered near the iconic gates, some just soaking in the architecture, all awestruck, while others were snapping away with their cameras, hoping to grab a piece of British history. Right in the middle of it all, there I stood, James Harper, a royal guard, still as a statue. At 28, I was the image of military perfection, tall, with a commanding presence and a gaze that just didn't quit. My uniform, pressed sharp enough to cut, gleamed under the weak morning sun, and the bearskin hat just added to the whole imposing picture. I knew the drill for today. A few attempts to make me crack a smile, some silly questions from the tourists. It was all part of the job, but in the usual chaos of the crowd, one group stood out, young and loud. They weren't there to appreciate the history, oversized cameras in hand. Their voices were even drowning out the hum of traffic down the mall. Leading the pack was a guy in his early 30s, average height, with a smug look plastered on his face and a coffee cup in his hand. He swaggered right up to me. "Hey, buddy." "Why so serious?" he called out, stopping practically nose to nose with me. His voice was loud, clearly meant for everyone to hear. Of course, I didn't respond. Against the rules. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, like he wasn't even there. "Whoa! Check him out, guys," he went on. "Doesn't even blink. Maybe he's a robot." The tourists laughed, and his buddies joined in. The crowd started to murmur, and some people pulled out their phones to record the comedian trying to mess with the guard. "Come on, crack a smile. You're on duty, aren't you?" Someone from his group yelled. I stood there like a stone, but inside, I could feel my patience stretching thin. This was part of the gig. Putting up with the taunts, the provocations, the foolish antics that some tourists seemed to find entertaining. But this guy seemed determined to push it. Taking a little sip from his cup, he suddenly spat the coffee right at me. The crowd gasped. A moment of silence cut through the air as everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The group of tourists burst out laughing. Their leader clearly thought he'd won some kind of prize. This was a performance he'd come to London for. Spitting on a royal guard. Seriously spitting in the face of the royal guard. Someone in the crowd whispered, their words hanging in the air like a sharp jab. I didn't move. My face stayed as still as it had been, but the tension in my posture was probably pretty obvious. The crowd was locked on, watching every twitch. The tourist, meanwhile, was loving it, crossing his arms. He turned to his friends. "See? No reaction. They're just here for us, like mannequins. But mannequins don't command respect just by standing there." What he didn't get was that to most of the people watching, he looked less like a hero and more like a pathetic fool. His laughter echoed in a sea of disapproval. "That's too far. How could anyone think that's okay?" someone muttered from the sidelines. Exactly. There I stood, not just a soldier, but a guardian of tradition and honor. And this tourist, just a visitor thinking his money, gave him the right to disrespect everything he saw. The crowd around Buckingham Palace was buzzing. This guy's bold stunt had split the onlookers. Some were just shrugging it off. He's just joking. Relax. But others, mostly older folks, were clearly ticked off. "This is disgraceful," an elderly woman in a classy coat muttered, leaning on her cane, her voice cutting through the noise. She called out, "Young man, have you no respect at all?" The tourist just smirked and took another sip of his coffee. "Oh, come on, Grandma. I'm just having some fun. If you're so upset about this guy, why don't you take his place?" That's the kind of guy he was. The kind who thought the world revolved around him because he'd bought a plane ticket and booked a London tour. To him, I was just part of the attraction, a living exhibit he felt entitled to mess with. I stood there, still as ever, my posture perfect, my gaze locked. But even someone trained to take this kind of crap could feel the tension rising. I felt a faint pulse in my temples, getting bolder by the second. The tourist took a step forward, crossing the white line. That invisible barrier between the guard and the public. It wasn't just a line on the ground. It was a symbol, a clear boundary. Do not cross. And what happens if I do this? He asked, reaching out like he was going to touch my bearskin. That was it. The last straw. With a sharp, practice move, I brought my rifle up, intercepting his hand midair. Step back, sir. My voice boomed out, loud and firm, like a crack of thunder. The crowd froze. Even the ones who'd been laughing just moments before went silent. The resolve in my voice, the tension in my stance, it was impossible to ignore. I stared at the tourist with this calm intensity, sizing him up, deciding if he even deserved a warning. The tourist flinched, but he tried to play it cool. Couldn't show weakness in front of his buddies. Jerking his hand back, he turned to the crowd, looking for backup. Oh, wow! Look at him. So serious, he sneered, his voice quieter now but still defiant. His friends tried to egg him on. Come on, show him who's boss. What's he gonna do? One of them dramatically pulled a few coins from his pocket and tossed them at my feet. Here's a tip for you, mate, he said with a mocking grin. I didn't even flinch. My face stayed the same, but the tight grip on my rifle showed how much I was holding back. Even as the coins clinked on the stones, I didn't move. This isn't funny, it's disgusting, someone in the crowd finally shouted. The mood was shifting. Onlookers murmured in agreement, nodding as whispers of disapproval spread. But this rowdy bunch of tourists seemed to be in their own world, one where being on vacation excused any kind of behavior. All right, guys, let's see what else our buddy here can do. The leader laughed, clearly wanted to drag this whole thing out, but then I made the slightest move. I turned my head just a hair, my gaze locking onto the instigator. It wasn't just a glance. It was a silent telling off, so powerful it felt like time stopped for everyone watching. There was no doubt anymore. The royal guard was a symbol of dignity and tradition, something these tourists were way beneath. The conflict wasn't over, but the tension was through the roof, the crowd waiting to see what would happen next. The crowd got louder, all buzzing about this crazy show. Some were laughing, others were openly angry, and a bunch were just filming, knowing it would be all over social media soon with some dramatic headline. Then, cutting through the sea of people, an older man appeared. He walked slowly, his cane almost slipping on the cobblestones, but his eyes had more strength than the whole group of tourists combined. A veteran. You could tell right away. It wasn't just the old military jacket he wore like a badge of honor, but the way he stood, so dignified even though he was older. What kind of circus is this? He called out, his voice strong and clear, aimed right at the tourists. The crowd went silent. Even the ones who'd been snickering moments before were quiet, watching the old man. Do you have any idea who these people are? They're not here for your entertainment. His voice carried the weight of more than just my position. It felt like he was speaking for everyone who'd ever served and defended this country. But the star of this mess, the bold tourist, just smirked. Relax, old man. You're probably one of them, too. Lighten up. It's just a show. He took another swig of his coffee. If looks could kill, that guy would have drowned right there in his own coffee. Slowly, with a bit of a tremble, the veteran adjusted his metals, like he was reminding himself to speak, not shout. He turned to the crowd and said, "This man represents the honor and traditions of our country, and you're acting like cheap clowns." The crowd stirred. Some nodded in agreement, others stayed quiet, and a few were still watching through their phone screens. But the cocky tourist wasn't about to back down. Grinning again, he suddenly spat coffee in my direction. And that's when everything changed. I, who had been standing still as a statue, stepped forward decisively. My moves were quick, precise, like a drill sergeant's dream. I moved in front of the veteran, shielding him from the tourist, and spoke loudly but with control. "You've crossed the line. Return to your area immediately." My voice was so commanding, so authoritative, that even the loudmouth tourist faltered for a second. He instinctively stepped back, like he just realized he wasn't dealing with some guy in a uniform, but someone who just being there demanded respect. The crowd came alive. Someone started clapping, like they knew they were witnessing something important. "Good for him," shouted the elderly woman who tried to shame the tourist earlier. Others in the crowd echoed her. "Now that's a real man," someone called out. As for the tourist, he just stood there, looking back and forth between me and the veteran, clearly not knowing how to come back from this. His friends, who'd been cheering him on just minutes ago, were quiet, some even backing away into the crowd. All eyes were on me and the veteran. The veteran looked at me, gratitude in his eyes, and said softly, "Good job, son." It wasn't just a thank you. It was a recognition that decency and tradition could still stand tall against cheap thrills. I just nodded, holding my position, but the respect in my eyes was clear. The crowd, once divided, now erupted in applause and cheers of support. It wasn't a show for the tourists anymore. It had turned into a story about standing your ground and having some respect, something none of them would forget anytime soon. The tourists started to realize the tide had turned on him. The crowd wasn't laughing anymore. His buddies, who'd been egging him on, were now looking away. Some even looked embarrassed, like they were ashamed they'd gone along with it. The guy tried to play it down. "Hey, come on, everyone, it was just a joke." "Lighten up. Why so serious?" he said, glancing around, hoping for some friendly faces. Instead, he got glares. "Oh, now it's just a joke, when everything's falling apart, right?" the silence seemed to say. Then someone from the crowd yelled, "Who does that? This is a disgrace." Another woman chimed in, loud and clear. "You think this is funny? You look like a complete idiot." The guy shifted uncomfortably, shuffling his feet like the ground was burning. But it was too late. One of the people who'd been filming the whole thing had already uploaded the video online. Social media was blowing up with footage of the tourists spitting on the guard and getting a firm but dignified response. The crowd, which had been split just moments before, was now united in their disapproval of the tourist. Someone clapped, then another, until applause rippled through the square. A police officer, drawn by the commotion, approached the scene. The tall cop, in his Navy uniform, addressed the tourist in a calm but firm voice. "You violated public decorum. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the area." "Oh, come on. We were just having fun." The tourist protested weakly, but his voice had lost its edge. "Immediately, sir," the officer repeated, stepping forward. The tourist had no choice but to comply. His group tried to act like they didn't know him, shuffling awkwardly behind him as he left. He tried to salvage some dignity, calling over his shoulder, "Relax, people. It was just entertainment." But his words were drowned out by the murmurs of disapproval from the crowd. As the tourist disappeared around the corner, one woman stepped forward. She bent down to pick up the coins the guy had thrown earlier, holding them in her hand. Looking at the crowd, she declared, "This man deserves more than your cheap spectacle." Her words sparked another wave of applause, even louder this time. The crowd wasn't just supporting her. They were honoring me, James Harper, who had stood firm through it all. I adjusted my bearskin with calm precision, like nothing had happened, and returned to my post. My composure and restraint commanded respect. You could feel it in every gaze. The elderly veteran walked closer, stopping just a few feet away, looking me straight in the eye. He quietly said, "Thank you for your service, son." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that applause or cheers just couldn't match. It was recognition from someone who understood the value of honor and resilience. The crowd slowly started to disperse, but the emotions hung in the air. Phones buzzed with notifications, comments on the viral video pouring in. The footage now told a story not of mockery, but of dignity winning out over ignorance. As the square emptied, I remained at my post, just like I had that morning when it all began. I stood motionless, like a statue, my image a lasting symbol of honor and dedication. My day ended as it started, in silence, broken only by the distant sounds of London. But I knew my work mattered. My steady stance had proven that honor and respect can still beat out arrogance and ignorance. If you believe in the importance of standing up for what's right, if you appreciate stories of resilience and respect, then consider subscribing to my channel. Let's share more stories that remind us of the values that truly matter.